I was stirring the gravy for my famous pot roast, 3 hours in the oven, just the way my daughter loved it, when she dropped the bomb. Dad, Emily began, sitting at my kitchen table with two bright red gift bags in front of her. Mark and I have been talking. We think it's time for you to move somewhere special. A place where trained professionals can look after you. The steam from the roast curled into the air, filling the room with rosemary and garlic. My fork froze mid-air. What on earth are you talking about? I gripped the back of my chair until my knuckles whitened. Mark stepped into the kitchen from the hallway, looking smug as a cat with a canary. At 48, his hairline was already retreating faster than an army in winter, and that permanent scowl made him look 20 years older. Walt, he said in a voice dripping with false patience, you're not the man you used to be. This will be better for everyone. Better for you to take over my house, you mean? I shot back, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Emily's eyes flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. Guilt. Or maybe fear. She'd rehearsed this conversation. We care about you, she tried. If you cared, I said, pointing toward the mantel crowded with family photos, you wouldn't be talking about shipping me off like unwanted furniture. 40 years I worked 3 jobs at times, so you could go to college, Emily. 40 years of sweat and sacrifice. Mark moved closer, casually positioning himself between me and the front door. My time in the Navy taught me to read body language, and this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an ambush. The paperwork's already filed, he said, producing a manila folder like some kind of magician. We found a great place, Sunrise Meadows. They've got medical care, activities, everything you need. I don't need anything except to be left in my own home. I snapped. My voice echoed off the kitchen walls, the same walls I'd painted every few years since buying this house in the suburbs of St. Paul. The same kitchen where Emily learned to crack eggs when she was 8. Emily's chair scraped against the tile as she stood. Dad, please. You fell last month. I slipped on ice. I barked. If you visited more than every other month, you'd know that. Mark stepped closer, his cologne thick and expensive. Look, old man, this is happening whether you like it or not. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. You can pack, or we'll do it for you. The roast sat forgotten. Valentine's dinner for 3, ruined before it began. They walked out, slamming the door behind them. Through the window, I watched Mark's shiny black Cadillac roll down my driveway, taking my daughter with him. The house felt colder somehow, even with the oven still on. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my recliner with a baseball bat across my knees, every light in the house blazing. By 9 a.m. sharp, the rumble of a truck outside told me they'd arrived. I'd been up all night, sitting in my bedroom with the door barricaded by my old oak dresser. The baseball bat rested across my knees. If they wanted me out, they were going to have to work for it. Dad, open the door! Emily's voice came from the porch. Higher pitched than usual, a note of urgency in it. We know you're in there. I didn't answer. Let them try. The sound of a key in the lock froze me in place. My spare key, the one I'd given Emily years ago for emergencies. I guess this qualified in her mind. The door opened, and heavy footsteps crossed the hallway. Mark appeared in my bedroom doorway like a storm cloud, 2 large men in matching uniforms standing behind him. Professional movers. Or maybe just professional muscle. Don't make this difficult, Walt, Mark said, eyes narrowing. Your stuff's already packed. I forced a laugh. You just got here. Nothing's packed. Emily came in behind him, her eyes red from crying. I couldn't tell anymore if the tears were real or just part of the act. Dad, this is temporary. Just until we get your affairs sorted. My affairs, I said, jabbing my cane toward the dresser, are just fine. Birth certificate, will, insurance policies, all exactly where they've been for the last 15 years. One of the movers ignored me completely and started pulling shirts from my closet, my navy dress uniform, the suit I wore to my wife Linda's funeral, the sweater Emily gave me last Christmas. All tossed into boxes like they were garage sale leftovers. Stop touching my things! I swung my cane, but Mark caught it midair, twisting it out of my grip. Bob, Jim, load it up, he said, not even looking at me. The efficiency was terrifying. These men had done this before. 40 years of my life was boxed up in less than an hour. The wedding photo of Linda and me disappeared into bubble wrap. The Purple Heart I'd never told Emily about went into a box marked miscellaneous. My tools, the same ones that had fixed every hinge and pipe in this house, vanished into storage crates. Where are you taking all of this? I demanded. Storage unit, Mark said without glancing up from his clipboard. Until we decide what to keep. Until you decide what you can sell, I thought. The ride that followed was a nightmare. I sat in the back of Mark's Cadillac, locked in by the child safety system, watching the familiar streets of St. Paul slide past like scenes from a life I was being forced to leave behind. Emily sat in the front, stealing occasional glances at me like she wasn't sure whether to feel guilty or relieved. Sunrise Meadows sat at the end of a long, winding driveway lined with overpruned bushes. The red brick facade tried to look inviting, but the smell of disinfectant hit me the second we stepped inside. Mr. Walker, a man in a perfectly pressed polo shirt said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Welcome. I'm Adam Keller, the intake coordinator. We've been expecting you. I'm not staying, I said flatly. Of course, he replied smoothly. Everyone feels that way at first. But I think you'll be very comfortable here. Room 214 had beige walls, a narrow bed, and a window overlooking the parking lot where Mark's Cadillac sat idling. My belongings had been dropped inside in a few small boxes. A framed photo of Linda in her nurse's uniform was on the nightstand, looking entirely out of place. My toolbox was shoved in the corner beside a walker I didn't need. Dinner's at 6, Adam said from the doorway. Medication distribution is at 8. Visiting hours end at 9. When can I leave? I asked. He smiled like I'd told a joke. That'll be up to your family and our medical staff. The door clicked shut. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up Linda's photo. She'd been 43 when it was taken, just a year younger than Emily was now. Beautiful, determined, proud. She had never once looked at me with the cold calculation I'd seen in my daughter's eyes. 40 years I'd worked 3 jobs, days at the auto shop, nights at the hardware store, weekends doing odd jobs, so Emily could graduate debt-free. I'd sold my motorcycle, my father's old watch, even my fishing boat to make it happen. And now she'd handed me over to strangers so she and Mark could take my home. I set the photo back down, my hands steady. They thought I was beaten. That I'd spend the rest of my days here playing bingo and waiting to die. They didn't know me at all. 2 days in Sunrise Meadows was all I needed to learn the rhythm of the place. Mornings brought the sound of carts rolling down the hallway, delivering little paper cups of pills. Afternoons were for group activities, which mostly meant staff corralling people into a lounge to watch game shows at a volume that could wake the dead. Evenings, the place went quiet except for the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. Most of the residents shuffled along in slippers, their eyes cloudy, their voices faint. But near the far windows of the common room, I noticed a different group, 3 people sitting together every morning, talking in low, deliberate tones while the rest dozed in their chairs. I approached them on a chilly Sunday morning, my cane tapping against the polished linoleum. You look like someone who doesn't quite belong here, the woman said, her silver hair pulled back into a perfect bun. Her voice had an edge to it, like she could slice through lies in a heartbeat. Name's Margaret Stevens. Walt Walker, I replied, easing into the empty chair at their table. The man to her right had the thick hands of someone who'd spent his life fixing engines. Frank Doyle, he said with a nod. I was a mechanic for 40 years before my daughter sold my shop for pennies the moment I signed over power of attorney. The third member of the group was tall, thin, and carried himself like a man who'd once been used to commanding a room. Robert Hale, he said. 50 years practicing law before my son convinced me to retire somewhere comfortable. His eyes narrowed. Now my house belongs to one of his golf buddies. Margaret leaned forward. None of us are here because we need medical care. And none of us agreed to come here. That sound familiar? I told them my story, the Valentine's ambush, the movers, the Cadillac ride here. When I mentioned my house, Frank muttered something under his breath that I won't repeat. Robert just shook his head slowly. This facility, Robert said, isn't just a nursing home. It's a pipeline. Families get talked into putting someone here, paperwork gets shuffled around, assets vanish. And the staff get their cut. I frowned. That's a serious accusation. Serious and true, Margaret replied. Adam Keller, intake guy, he's the point man. He knows every legal loophole, and he's got a doctor on the inside who'll sign mental incompetence evaluations without ever meeting the patient. Once that's filed, the family gets full control over your property. Frank's voice was low but sharp. And Keller's done this a lot. We don't know how many times, but I'd bet it's more than a dozen. Robert folded his hands. If we can document it, we could take down the whole operation. I've been watching patterns, who comes in, who leaves, and what happens to their assets. It's consistent, methodical, and always benefits the same people. Margaret slid a small notebook across the table. These are names, dates, and notes I've kept since they brought me in. Families that stopped visiting, homes sold below market value, bank accounts emptied. I flipped through it, my pulse quickening. Every page was another betrayal, another life dismantled. So, I said, closing the book, what's the plan? Robert's lawyer's mind was already 3 moves ahead. We need hard evidence, recordings, documents, anything that shows the fraud in progress. One clean case can bring them down, but a pattern of cases? That's bulletproof. Frank cracked his knuckles. I'll handle anything technical, computers, printers, anything we can access without raising suspicion. Margaret can keep tracking family visits. Robert handles the legal side. You. He gave me a pointed look. You're new. They won't see you coming. Margaret smiled faintly. Fresh eyes, Walt. That's an advantage. We broke up when the staff wheeled in lunch carts, but I carried their words with me back to my room. They thought they'd isolated me, made me helpless. Instead, they'd handed me allies who had nothing left to lose. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the heating vents. Around 10:30, I got up for a glass of water. The hallways were dim, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I was halfway to the kitchen when I heard a voice I recognized, Adam Keller's. He was standing just around the corner near the administrative office, speaking quietly into the phone. Yes, Emily, the paperwork is ready. Your father's officially declared incompetent. My blood went cold. Emily's voice was faint but clear enough to hear. Perfect. When can we start the sale? Give me a week, Keller replied. For an extra $5,000, I can speed things up. Dr. Reynolds signed the forms without ever seeing him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Emily had shown me how to use the voice memo function a few months back. My thumb found the button. Recording. What about the neighbors? Emily asked. They'll have opinions, but once the legal paperwork's filed, it won't matter, Keller said. The house can be sold inside 2 weeks. And don't worry, I've done this 46 times. No one's ever challenged it. 46 times. The conversation ended, and his footsteps faded down the hallway. I stood there in the shadows, my phone still recording the silence that followed. I had them. Not just Emily. Not just Mark. The whole rotten operation. The next morning at precisely 9, I knocked on Robert's door like a man holding dynamite. He opened it, eyebrows rising at my expression. "What's wrong, Walt?" "Get Margaret and Frank." Now. Robert's instincts as a former attorney kicked in immediately. Within 5 minutes, the four of us were in his room with the doors shut and voices low. "I've got them," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Everything, Emily, Keller, the whole scheme." "Play it," Robert said simply. The recording filled the room. Emily's voice, cold and businesslike, perfect. "When can we start the sale?" Keller's oily confidence. "Give me a week. For an extra 5,000, I can speed things up." Dr. Reynolds signed the forms without ever seeing him. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. Frank's jaw tightened until I thought he might crack a molar. Robert leaned forward, eyes narrowing like a hawk sighting prey. 46 times. Keller bragged on the recording. When it ended, the silence was thick enough to cut. "That," Robert said at last, "is substantial evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud." "Audio quality?" "Clear enough," I replied. I was maybe 10 feet away. Robert began pacing. "This combined with documented patterns across residents could bring both criminal and civil charges. As long as you haven't signed anything transferring ownership, Walt, your property still legally belongs to you. The fabricated power of attorney has no standing." Frank's voice was low and dangerous. "So they're trying to steal something that isn't theirs." "Good." Margaret sat up straighter. "We can't let them do this to anyone else." 46 families, how many more?" "Not one more," Robert said firmly. "But we need more than one recording. We need medical records, financial papers, and any trace of the same pattern with other residents." "What about the others here?" I asked. "Some of them might be in the same situation." "Carefully," Robert warned. "We can't tip our hand. If Keller suspects, he'll destroy evidence." Frank cracked his knuckles. "And what about the police?" "We go to them only when we have enough to be undeniable," Robert replied. "The recording is critical, but corroborating documentation will make our case bulletproof." Margaret pulled her notebook from her cardigan. "I've been tracking visits. Which families show up, which suddenly stop. The pattern is ugly." "Perfect," Robert said. "Walt, keep your ears open. Fresh eyes pick up things the rest of us might miss. Frank, focus on finding any documents we can print without setting off alarms. Margaret, keep logging your visits data." "And the clock?" I asked. "They said they'll start the sale in a week," Robert reminded me. "We have maybe 5 days to build a case that can bury them." We broke up like conspirators in an old war movie, each of us slipping out separately. The rest of the day, I played the role of the compliant old man. I chatted with a nurse about bingo, watched half of an afternoon movie, even nodded off in the chair by the window. But my ears were tuned for anything, any slip, any whisper. That evening, during the so-called recreation hour, Frank motioned me over to one of the facility's dusty computers. "You need to see this," he murmured. On the screen was a real estate listing. My house. Price, $365,000. Photos of the front porch, the garden Linda planted, the driveway where I'd taught Emily to parallel park. All laid out like a sales brochure. "Posted 2 days ago," Frank said. "Agent's name is Diane Marshall. Says it's being sold due to family relocation." "Relocation," I muttered. "That's one way to describe throwing me out." Robert, who had wandered over, scanned the listing. "This is gold. Proof they're actively selling property while you're still legally competent." Frank clicked through comparable sales. "Market value's closer to $410,000. They're pricing it low for a fast sale. Desperate people." Robert said. Make sloppy choices. And sloppy choices create evidence. Frank printed every page, the listing, the photos, the agent's info. He also downloaded and timestamped everything, muttering something about metadata. When's the first showing? Margaret asked, appearing beside us. Frank scrolled. Thursday. That gives us 3 days, Robert said. We can time everything for maximum impact. I studied the photos one last time, my stomach twisting. Every memory in those walls reduced to square footage and updated kitchen appliances. But their greed had made a mistake. They'd left a paper trail. And now we had it. Tuesday afternoon, Robert found me in the common room, looking over the newspaper like I didn't have a care in the world. He sat beside me and spoke without turning his head. Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. We're going downtown. For what? I asked quietly. To see an old colleague of mine, a lawyer I trust. We'll tell the staff it's a cardiology appointment. Keep your cover. The next day, Frank distracted the activities director by faking an interest in the knitting club, while Margaret struck up a loud conversation with the receptionist. That gave Robert and me enough space to slip into the waiting cab without Adam Keller or his watchful staff noticing. Downtown Minneapolis rose ahead of us, glass and steel catching the winter sun. I clutched a manila envelope on my lap like it contained the crown jewels, which, in a way, it did. Inside were copies of Margaret's logs, Frank's printed real estate listing, and the damning recording from my phone. Robert led the way into a tall glass office building. The plaque beside the elevator read, Law Office of Thomas R. Gaines. Thomas was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a handshake that meant business. Walt, Robert, come in. Let's see what we've got. I laid the evidence on his mahogany desk. Robert walked him through it piece by piece, like presenting a case in court. Thomas listened without interrupting, his eyes narrowing at the right moments. When Robert finished, Thomas leaned back in his leather chair. This is significant. With the right filing, we can hit them with fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. But there's something else we need to cover, your will. I nodded. Changed it last summer. Entire estate goes to the Minneapolis Veterans Hospital. Emily's name isn't anywhere on it. Robert glanced at me in surprise. You never mentioned that. I had a feeling about Mark even then, I said. The way he kept asking about the house's value, about whether I planned to downsize. So I took precautions. Thomas pulled the will from a safe. Properly signed and notarized. And here's the best part. Once they file fraudulent incompetence papers, this document becomes even more valuable as evidence that you were of sound mind when you made the decision. A slow smile spread across Robert's face. They'll be committing crimes for property they were never going to inherit. Poetic justice, I said. We agreed to hold the will in reserve until after they'd signed sale contracts. That way, we could prove their full intent before dropping the hammer. By the time we returned to Sunrise Meadows, the staff's cheerfulness seemed even faker than usual. Keller greeted us with his practiced smile. How was the appointment, Mr. Walker? Doctor says I'm in better shape than most men half my age, I replied, and for once, I wasn't lying. That night, our group met in Margaret's room. The air was thick with anticipation. House showing is tomorrow at 2, Frank reported. If they're following the pattern, they'll push for a quick offer by the weekend. Perfect, Robert said. That gives us 2 days to finish tightening the net. Margaret passed around cookies from a care package. I've updated the visitor log. 3 more residents' families have stopped showing up entirely. I took a bite then spoke. Tomorrow, I'm going to let Emily and Mark think I'm ready to sign. That's when we'll get them on record again, this time face to face. Robert nodded. Once we have that, plus the real estate listing, plus the recording with Keller, there's no way out for them. Frank grinned. They picked the wrong old folks to mess with. We broke for the night, but I barely slept. My mind ran through every move we'd made so far, like a chess game where we'd lured the opponent into thinking they were winning. Tomorrow, Emily would come expecting to close the trap on me. Instead, she'd be walking into one of my own. Thursday afternoon, I sat in the Sunrise Meadows common room by the window, pretending to be lost in thought. In reality, my phone was already in my lap, voice memo app open, the red recording light hidden under the fold of my sweater. At 1:58 p.m., Emily and Mark walked in. She was dressed in her good daughter outfit, soft pastel sweater, hair just so, while Mark carried a black leather briefcase like he was about to close a $1 million deal. "Dad!" Emily beamed, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "You look great. They're taking such good care of you here." I gave her a tired smile. "Hello, Emily." Mark didn't waste time on small talk. He popped open the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Walt, here's the purchase agreement. We've already got an offer on the house, full asking price. All we need is your signature." "Purchase agreement?" I let my voice wobble with fake uncertainty. "What happens to the money from the sale?" "Don't worry about that," Mark said smoothly. "We'll put it into a trust for your care." Emily leaned forward, clasping her hands like she was explaining something to a stubborn child. "Dad, this is the best thing for you. Sunrise Meadows has a larger private suite available. You'd have your own bathroom, bigger window, maybe even cable." "Private suite," I repeated slowly. "And when I get better?" Emily's smile faltered. "Dad, you're not getting better. The doctors say your memory issues are only going to get worse. This is your home now." My hand trembled just enough to sell the act. "I don't remember the doctors saying that." "That's part of the disease," she said gently, as if I were already lost. "But we'll handle everything." Mark jumped back in. "Look, the buyers want to close fast. If you sign today, we can transfer the funds by next week." "And what will you do with the rest of the money after paying for my room?" I asked. Mark's eyes shifted, just for a fraction of a second, before he said, "We'll invest it. Commercial properties, steady rental income. Your care will be covered for years. And if something happens to me? Well," he shrugged. "The remainder would stay in the family. No reason to let it go to waste." I let the silence stretch, studying their faces the way I used to study an opponent across a poker table. They thought I was hesitating because I was confused. In reality, I was giving the recorder every second it needed to capture the greed in their voices. Finally, I set the pen down. "I need a moment to think." Emily's tone hardened. "Dad, there's nothing to think about. This is the right choice." Mark's patience snapped. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Walt. Your call." There it was, the threat. Clear. Unmistakable. And now recorded. I pushed the papers back toward them. "I'll let you know in the morning." Emily sighed and gathered the documents, Mark shoving them into the briefcase with more force than necessary. "Fine," he said. "But don't take too long. The offer won't wait forever." They left without another word, the click of Emily's heels echoing down the hallway. The moment they were out of sight, I stopped the recording and slid my phone into my pocket. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. They'd just handed me the final piece I needed. The next morning at breakfast, I slid into Robert's usual seat, the smell of burnt toast and weak coffee in the air. He took one look at me and knew. "You got them," he said quietly. "Every word," I replied. By noon, the four of us were in Robert's room again. Frank was grinning like a kid on Christmas. Margaret listened with her arms folded, her face pale but resolute. When the recording finished, Robert leaned back. "This is it. Between this, the Keller phone call, the real estate listing, and Margaret's logs, we're ready." "Next step?" I asked. "We file in court for an emergency injunction to stop the sale. Then we hand everything over for criminal charges. Margaret smiled faintly. And Emily and Mark? They'll be learning some new vocabulary, Robert said. Like arraignment and felony sentencing. Frank tapped the table. When do we move? Robert looked at me. Tomorrow morning. Cook County Courthouse. Bring everything. I nodded. Let's finish this. Friday morning, the Cook County Courthouse loomed ahead like a stone fortress. The sky was gray, the kind of winter morning that bites at your ears. Robert and I stepped out of the cab with our briefcases, his old leather one, mine a beat-up vinyl number I'd had since the late 80s. Inside were weeks of evidence, recordings, printouts, photographs, and the ace I hadn't yet shown Emily. The courthouse lobby smelled faintly of paper and floor polish. Security wands beeped as we passed through metal detectors, the officer giving my cane a once-over before waving me through. We reached the filing window just as the clerk called the next case. Robert stepped forward with the confidence of a man who'd spent decades in rooms like this. Your Honor, he said, sliding a thick file across the counter, we're requesting an emergency injunction to halt the fraudulent sale of Mr. Walter Walker's home, along with criminal charges for conspiracy to commit elder fraud. Judge Margaret Davis, a sharp-eyed woman with steel-gray hair, adjusted her reading glasses and flipped through the first few pages. Her face didn't change much, but her eyes sharpened as she scanned the transcribed Keller call, the listing printouts, and the visitor logs. These are serious allegations, Mr. Hale, she said. Yes, Your Honor, Robert replied. And we have audio evidence of both the facility's involvement and the family's intent to profit from fabricated medical incompetence. The judge read for another moment, then nodded. Emergency hearing granted. Thursday, March 6th. All parties to be notified immediately. Sale of the property is suspended until the matter is resolved. The gavel came down with a sound that felt like the first shot in a long overdue war. When we stepped back out into the cold, Robert gave me the faintest smile. That's one in the win column. Just the first, I said. On the ride back to Sunrise Meadows, I couldn't help but imagine Emily's face when she got the court summons. She'd probably think it was some minor formality, something she could smooth over with charm and excuses. She had no idea the floor was about to give way under her. Adam Keller was at the front desk when we walked in. Mr. Walker, how was your doctor's appointment? He asked, all fake concern. Doctor says I'm in perfect shape, I said, and I meant it in more ways than one. That night, our group gathered for the last planning session before the showdown. Margaret had brought more logs. Frank had dug up background on the real estate agent showing my house, clean record, completely unaware she was part of a fraud. Robert laid out the courtroom plan. First, we played the Keller recording. Then the face-to-face with Emily and Mark. Then the listing evidence, then Margaret's logs. Finally, Walt reveals the will. The will? Margaret asked. I smiled. Last summer, I changed it. Entire estate goes to the Minneapolis Veterans Hospital. Emily doesn't get a cent. Every crime they've committed was for something they'd never inherit anyway. Frank's grin was pure satisfaction. That's going to hurt. It'll do more than hurt, Robert said. It'll prove deliberate, calculated fraud with no legal benefit to them. Judges love slamming the gavel on that kind of arrogance. We talked until nearly lights out, going over every detail. Everyone knew their role. Every piece of evidence had a place in the sequence. When I got back to my room, I sat on the bed and looked at Linda's photo. We're almost there, sweetheart, I murmured. One more week, and they'll be out of our lives for good. The days that followed were slow, deliberate torture for Emily and Mark, though they didn't know it. They kept calling, trying to push me to sign. I played dumb, saying I was still thinking, or waiting for more information. Meanwhile, Keller's behavior grew more cautious. He'd glance at me longer in the hallways, as if sensing something had shifted. But it was too late. The trap was already set, and the teeth were closing. By the time Thursday rolled around, we were ready for the fight. Thursday morning, courtroom 4B buzzed with the kind of quiet tension you can almost hear. Emily and Mark sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Emily kept smoothing her sweater, eyes darting around the room. Mark leaned back, feigning confidence, but his jaw muscle twitched every few seconds. Judge Davis entered, and the room rose. She took her seat, banged the gavel, and called the case. Walker versus Thornton. Robert stood, every inch the seasoned attorney despite his nursing home issue slacks. Your Honor, this is a case of calculated elder fraud involving falsified medical documents, fraudulent real estate transactions, and conspiracy to strip my client, Mr. Walter Walker, of his home and assets. The judge gestured. Proceed. Robert nodded to me. I pulled up my phone, connected it to the courtroom speaker, and pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room, clear as day, perfect. When can we start the sale? Keller's reply followed, dripping with confidence. Give me a week. For an extra $5,000, I can speed things up. Dr. Reynolds signed the forms without ever seeing him. I've done this 46 times, never had a challenge stick. Emily's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection! Recording without consent. Overruled, Judge Davis said sharply. Illinois law requires only one-party consent. Robert resumed. Your Honor, we also have a face-to-face recording between my client and the defendants, in which they directly pressure him to sign over his home. I played the second file. Mark's voice came through first. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Walt. Your call. Then Emily's. Dad, there's nothing to think about. This is the right choice. The judge's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of disgust in her eyes. Next, Robert said, evidence of the home being listed for sale without the owner's consent, under the false claim of family relocation. Frank stepped forward with printed pages from the online listing. As you can see, Your Honor, the property is priced below market for a fast sale. Photos, address, and agent information are all here, time-stamped and pulled directly from the listing's site. Margaret followed with her visitor logs. I've documented over a dozen cases in this facility where residents' families stopped visiting shortly before their homes were sold. In several cases, the same staff members were involved. Then came the blow I'd been waiting to deliver. I walked to the front, holding a sealed envelope. Your Honor, this is my will, signed and notarized last August, months before any claims of incompetence. It leaves my entire estate to the Minneapolis Veterans Hospital. Emily Thornton is specifically excluded. Emily's head snapped toward me. What? Mark muttered a curse under his breath. Robert took the will from me and handed it to the judge. This proves that not only were they attempting to steal property, they were doing so for something they would never legally inherit. It is clear evidence of intent to defraud without even the possibility of lawful benefit. The judge studied the document for a long moment, then set it aside. Defendants, do you have anything to say? Emily stood, tears already in her eyes. Dad, we were just trying to help you. We owe so much money and… I cut her off, my voice steady. You were trying to help yourselves. Don't dress it up as anything else. Mark's face darkened. You're going to die soon anyway. Why shouldn't we? Enough. Judge Davis barked, slamming the gavel. She straightened in her chair. This court finds sufficient evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and document falsification. Guilty verdict for both defendants. Bailiff, take them into custody. The handcuffs clicked around their wrists, the metallic sound ringing in the silence. Emily's sobs followed them as they were led away, Mark glaring at me like he wanted to burn a hole through my skull. But it was over. The fraud was dead. The courthouse steps felt different on the way out. Colder, cleaner, like the air itself had been scrubbed of something rotten. Robert walked beside me, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Frank and Margaret were waiting near the curb, having watched the whole trial from the gallery. "Well," Frank said, "I guess we don't have to wonder if justice exists anymore." Margaret's eyes were bright, but not with tears. "They thought you were just another old man to shove aside. They'll think twice before trying that again." The taxi ride back to Sunrise Meadows felt like a victory parade. News had already spread, staff whispering in corners, residents glancing up from their chairs with something that looked like hope. Adam Keller was nowhere to be seen. By evening, word came down that he'd been arrested too, and the state had launched an investigation into the facility's ownership. The next morning, the new administrator, a nervous man in a wrinkled suit, met me in the hallway. "Mr. Walker, we had no idea about Keller's activities. Please accept our apologies." "Your apologies are noted," I said, "and rejected." 2 days later, I was gone. Frank and Margaret helped me load the last box into the back of a friend's pickup truck, a battered blue Ford that smelled faintly of old cigars. My toolbox went in last, right beside Linda's photo albums and the Purple Heart I'd kept hidden for decades. Home. The word had a weight to it as I stepped through the front door. The air smelled faintly of cedar from the old chest in the hallway. The kitchen, where Emily had first tried to break me, was mine again. The dining room table sat ready for the right kind of company. That Thursday, the first dinner with my chosen family happened. Pot roast simmered in the oven, filling the house with the kind of warmth that doesn't come from a thermostat. Margaret arrived first, carrying a still warm apple pie. Frank came with a bottle of wine he'd been saving for something worth celebrating. Robert brought a stack of papers, updates on the lawsuits now building against the facility's owners and the 46 other families they'd wronged. "Minimum 18 months for Emily and Mark," Robert reported over dinner. "And Keller's already flipped on the owners. The state's looking at permanent closures." Margaret poured the wine. "To justice. To friends," I added. We ate, laughed, and shared stories until almost midnight. Somewhere along the way, I realized that what I'd gained was worth more than the house, more than the legal victory. I'd gained proof that family isn't about blood, it's about who stands with you when the walls close in. After they left, I sat in my recliner, looking at Linda's photo on the mantel. "It's over, sweetheart," I whispered. "We won." Outside, snow was falling in soft sheets, covering the garden Linda had planted all those years ago. By spring, it would bloom again, fresh, alive, untouched by the winter that had tried to kill it. And me? The old man they thought they could throw away was still standing, still fighting, still living. And the best days were yet to come.